Yeah, we started exploring the basic workflows. We created the built-in out-of-the-box workflows, and you were, there were other two things, which was workflow variable, and there was another option which we were supposed to discuss today.
Okay. Yeah, so today we will see that custom task process and then the workflow variables. Yeah, so I opened the site in the designer, and then I'll click on this workflow here, and we can see that there is a reuse demo workflow, a reusable workflow with the name reuse demo. So I'm going to click on here, edit workflow. And these were the steps or actions that we created in our last class. Okay, so let's discuss the initiation form parameters and local variables. Okay, see here we have an action called then wait for field to not equal to some value here, which was empty now. I'll just say fx. So fx means the function. We want to populate the value from a function, and we use that button. What's happening? It's taking so long. Okay, got it. So here you could see the data source. So you can pick a value from the workflow variables and parameters. So by default, SharePoint has default context variables, workflow context. So you can see there are many parameters or contextual variables available in the designer itself. So you can see that association, field from source. So these are all the fields. You can get the current item URL, you can get the current site URL, current user, date and time last run, date and time started, who initiated the workflow, and the instance ID, which is which is a unique ID responsible. You can get the item name and the workflow status URL. And in case if you want to access some information from the history list, where the history list which is associated with this existing workflow, then you can select this, and it's just another list that you can access here. So normally you can access any list like that. You could see that all the lists and libraries are populated here. Custom list, customized report documents. Similarly, the history list that is already associated. So this association column means that it's not just another history list, but it's a history list that is associated with this workflow. It'll pick the one associated when you select this way. So you can select any of the fields as source from the particular data source called history list. You can get the workflow association ID, template ID, all that. And similarly, you can get the task list. Though you might be able to see the other different task lists created here, selecting this one will refer to the task list that is associated with this workflow. And you can access all the metadata fields. So let's look at the initiation form parameters. So initiation form parameters collect data when this workflow is started manually. An automatic start uses default values. Reusable workflow may also collect data when the workflow is associated, and these values override corresponding initiation defaults. So now I'm trying to add some form parameters here. When I say form, it's the initiation form. So let's give some name here. Let's say, for example, I want to take some comments when the users initiates the form. So what kind of field is that? So is it single line of text or multiple line? Number, choice, whatever is the type of the field that you want to select here, you can select. So for now it's a multiple lines text. So I select that, and then here it says collect from parameter string. So the value has to be collected from a parameter. Say, okay, let's say starting the workflow. Finish. I click OK here. Okay, now let me remove these ones. Use association columns to have this workflow create columns in its associated list. So if you want to create new columns in your task list, then you can create some columns and then associate them here. You can, in this dialog you can see all the columns list, site columns list. So you can select either. You can select the existing columns, or you can click on add new column to associate that. Okay, this way. Or you can click on add new column. Add new column. Demo. Say next. Finish. Click on OK. Okay. Now let's go ahead and publish this and see what happens, or how the workflow impacted after we just configured the form parameters, association columns. So let me go ahead and publish this workflow.
Manoj, quick question. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Actually, I did not get this concept. So what are we trying to do here? So basically, a workflow is started. After that, you want to pass some parameters, or is it further going to create further tasks within that workflow? What is it trying to do?
Yeah, so that's right. So when we actually start the workflow, we see this form, right? The task form.
Okay.
So we want to add some variables, some more controls to the form, field controls, so that we can take some additional values from the user. There are many ways to do that. Yeah.
Can you give me like a
Yeah.
real-time example, any application that you think?
Sure.
I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah. Once we see that in action, we'll get more clarity, and then I'll give a real-time example. So let me just do that. So let me just go ahead and create a new item in the pages library. I'm just checking in this document, publishing it. Now I'll look at the workflows here for this attack, for this demo workflow item. Now you don't see any running workflows. I can start this workflow manually as we configure. You could see that the one just I added. comments. So this is the initiation form for the workflow, and you want to add some fields down here, so you can add that.
Okay.
So you can provide some values here, when starting the workflow. Normally we provide the comments, before he starts the workflow. We provide a comments text box where user can enter, what is this workflow about, or what is the content about that for which he's trying to start the workflow. So he will provide some comments that, okay, done with the final changes, and then say start, so that will start the workflow. Now let's go ahead and see the workflows here. Now you could see the workflow is in progress. Now I'm going to click on the task, and the same thing, I can complete the task. So ended. So initiation form parameters, you understood that right now, Srikar?
Yeah, I understood that. So basically, to provide any kind of additional information.
Exactly. So that can be, yeah, so that's how it works. And the local variables are something that you could use within this workflow process. Say for example, if you have two parallel blocks running, and in one of the parallel block you have a output, and you have a value to be stored, so that you can use that in the other block. Okay, so you don't have a global variable concept here, something like you do it in the code. So that global variables concept here, we use local variables within the workflow. So whatever the value that you get it as part of one step or one condition or an activity, you store that value in the local variables so that you can access them in the other if-else conditions.
Manoj, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the Microsoft project, we define the task and the schedule. So this workflow will give the process flow of each task I defined in the Microsoft project. Or, can you explain me a little bit, because I missed the last class? So it's more like Microsoft project, right? It's this workflow what you are talking about is.
Okay, so the workflow, I'm not quite sure how the workflow works with Microsoft project, but this is how it works with usually with the SharePoint sites or whatever. So how it works is, if I go back to the site here, and if I go back to the pages library, this is the pages library. So what my workflow means, so what exactly workflow means is that if I want some business process to be set up for some content type, or all the content types that's going into the pages library, then I define that process as a workflow, and then associate that workflow with any pages library or list. So here you could see that this is the pages library to which I'm trying to associate a workflow, business process. So how do I attach that? So you click on library and you click on the workflow settings here on the ribbon. So there you can see add a workflow. So this is the page where you configure the workflow with this library. So the content type, on which content type you want to run this workflow that you're configuring it now. So these many content types are associated with this library already. So which one, I mean, for which content type you want to run this business process. The workflows. So all these are out of the box workflows except the one, okay, there is not, okay, we created the use which is not shown up here anyway. So workflow, and then the name of the workflow, so the instance for which you want to give a name, and the task list. So every process will, so when we be talking about the process could mean that approving the content which is created by an author. So that means there is a task for the approver to approve the content. So that particular approver has to approve the particular content, which means it's a task assigned to him. So that task record is maintained in the task list. So there should be a list to track all those tasks. So that is nothing but the task list that we are selecting here. Either you can choose the existing task lists that are created as part of the site creation process, or you can create a new task list to store that information. And a history list. History list is something similar to logging for the workflow. So whenever the workflow keeps running and does the each condition or activity, then whatever that step that it's been through, it'll log or it'll give an extra information about that activity, saying that, okay, this activity is completed, this activity just started, or failed due to some reasons, all that. So it's kind of logging for the workflow when it comes to history list. And when should this workflow trigger? Should it trigger manually, or should it trigger when a new item is created or changed? So all these are the trigger points that you can configure for a workflow. Does it make clear, Babu?
Yes.
Okay.
If you go back to the SharePoint designer, I understood the parameterized variables, the initiation from parameters. But what did we actually did in the association of columns? That part I totally didn't get.
Sure.
So
And its associated lists. Okay, let me go back to the task list. Okay, so I'm going to show you one more action that does the similar thing here, which is collect the data from user. So even that is similar to assign it to do item, but it got one extra step, creating some fields. So if I say collect data from user, so what data you want to collect from user? Even this creates a new content type, like we did here in the assign reuse task to approvers. Okay, so I'll just say new task, and then you get this to define the form fields. This is similarly what we did for by adding the comments. And from which user you want to collect? From approvers. Approvers is the SharePoint group. I'm going to delete this one. Okay, this one makes sense. Let me delete this. Let me publish this. Okay, I think this should have the workflows ended already. Let me start a new workflow instance. And now if I go back to the task form, you see this? So these are the columns added in the task form. The same is done through the association columns as well. And the collect data does it very quick. So you are trying to collect some data from approvers. So that means, so collect the data, so the data is nothing but data related to the task. And you are collecting that from the certain group of users. So those columns, those particular extra information will be created as a content type and associated with this task content type. And now you could see that the task form has these columns added here in the form. You don't have to customize the form to add those columns explicitly. Okay. Now, are you able to make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Manoj, I'm sorry, I have a question. Can you list the items step by step, like creating a form and then creating a columns and associate those columns to the form?
Okay.
So can you list out the steps to create a workflow before proceeding?
Sure. See, the forms are created by the designer itself. So if you are trying to create a new custom designer workflow, we open the designer and then you go. I mean, this is how you create the steps. So you have a lot of custom activities or actions like this. So what should happen when you start the workflow? Should it send an email, or should it start, I mean, assign a to-do item, like assign a task to the group of users? So these are different actions or activities that you can set as part of the workflow process, which we did here. Okay. So if I go back to the workflows, or click on reuse demo, that's the workflow that I created, which is a reusable workflow. And when I create the workflow, and when I'm done with the process, and when I save and publish that, it will create all these forms. You can see that these forms are not created by us. It's created by the designer based on the process that we actually configured. So reuse demo is the association form, and the new task, it's the task form that you see it when the approvers try to approve it. That's the one that populates is the task form. So the columns, we do not create it. It's all created by the designer itself. So let me go ahead and click on this workflow, edit workflow. So each action defines if, or lets the designer know if you are configuring any extra columns with any of these forms. So based on that, the form generates the columns within it. So for example here, this particular activity, collect new task. So I click on next, and then you can see the next new task. So I'm configuring some columns here. So that means this task should have some columns to be read from the approvers group. So when I configure these columns, as it says it's a new task, or it's a task content type or task information. So these columns will be populated internally as a task content type. Okay, let me show that. Here on the task list. Okay. Let me go to the list settings. You can see the new task content type here, which we created with the workflow. So I click on that new task. You can see the columns added, column 1, column 2. So internally it does everything for us. You don't have to explicitly do it. We just need to configure the process, the actions, the steps within the designer. That's all. Does that sound clear, Bob?
Yes, yes. And this page gives more clarity.
Which one?
Yeah, the page title, predecessors, priority, status, percentage complete. This will give a good idea about what you're talking about.
Okay. So any content type that we're going to create, it should follow a parent content type. So if you observe this new task content type, it is inheriting this SharePoint server workflow task content type, which has those fields that you just read. Predecessors, priority, task status, complete, all these columns. I mean, you can see it from here itself. Predecessors is the column coming from the task source. So source is nothing but the parent content type. So all these columns are coming from the parent content types, which is nothing but task or workflow task. And our new content type called the new task is just having the column 1 and column 2. You can see that here. The source is new task. So for any task, there will be priority, status, status it's completed or outcome, and then the percentage complete if you want to have it in the percentage terms, like 50% complete after one business process, or otherwise after one approver approved this item, so 50% complete, and then if the second approver approves, then 100% complete, something like that. And they assign to who the user to whom the task is assigned to, start date, due date, when this task has been created, due date, when should that be completed, or the time by which or by when the approvers should take an action. That's all. Due date. You understood the content type concept that I just told?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. So for the basic designer, basic requirements, we keep using this, collect data from users. We often use this action. Okay, what I want to actually tell you today is about the new activity introduced in 2010, called Start Custom Task Process. This gives a lot of functionality, a lot of events exposed. Okay, so like it's rule sentence. So we call this line as rule sentence. So whatever that is underlined, that should be configured. So by default, it named the task as task 3. I can rename it as well. And you can see that down here, settings, only allow task recipients and process owners to read and edit workflow tasks. So earlier in 2007 or in the normal designer workflows, giving an exception on this action, you do not have an option to configure this. So that means anybody can go to the task if they have sufficient access, like if they're approvers, even though if the task is not assigned to them, they can still go ahead and approve it or reject it, or view the task at least. But this particular action allows you to configure the permissions basically for the task items, so that only the task recipients, so if the task is assigned to me, only I can view it, or I can just go ahead and do any action on that task, but not anybody else. So that is allowed by default here. Otherwise, we had to write a lot of custom code for permissions on this particular task list. So we used to write a event receiver on the task list. So whenever a task is created in the event list, so we will remove all the permissions, or only for that particular task item, the permissions are set so that only the assigned to user have the permissions on it. So looking at the list, what we do from the UI is, there is something called manage permissions for each item. You can click on that and you can stop inheriting permissions, because currently it's inheriting the permissions of the parent. So which means whatever permissions that you give for the entire site collection will be inheriting down here. So I have to stop inheriting permissions and then remove all of these users, and then add only the user to whom that particular task is assigned to. That's what we used to do it in the code. So we have to do all that in the code, and now in the designer you could see that one just option given, you can configure it. And you want to show this following commands: reassignment, change requests, all that. Okay, I want to talk about this process, change the behavior of a single task. So a workflow can contain many tasks. So one task, something related to one department, other task related to different department. So maybe if it is about the finance thing, first thing is that the budget has to be approved by the CEO, and then it should be processed by the finance department. So there could be two different tasks, or which can be set up as two different task process. Okay. So now what we are saying is, earlier, whatever the normal task that gets created when you use the activity, collect data from user, or assign it to do item, these are very simple tasks. These do not have a task process. It's just task item created, and you act upon it. But there is no process that you have control on, like the workflow process. So workflow process, when we say process, it has the workflow starting, workflow completed, and in the meanwhile you have in progress. So there are a lot of stages as part of the workflow process. So similarly, the process for the task called task process. So you can see that there is an event called before a task is assigned. So before a task is assigned, you want to do something, you can add the actions here. So before a task gets assigned, I want to send an email. So I can send an email here. And when a task is pending, so that means it's just assigned, no action has been taken. So you can do that, something here. When a task is pending, so before it gets completed, so you want to do something, you can pull some actions here. When a task expires, this event triggers when, say for example, you have set a due date for a task for only one day. So if the user or the approver does not take an action on this particular task for almost one day, then the task gets expired and this event gets triggered. So we use this mostly, whenever the task expires, you want to send our notification to the assigned to user, just reminding him that a task is, still there and it's waiting for your action. When a task is deleted, so if the task is deleted, do you want to run some actions? So normally when the item or task gets deleted, you want to just check if it's getting deleted in the proper conditions, in the proper scenario, or is getting deleted by the users manually. So unless the task gets completed, you do not want it to delete it. Or if it's getting deleted, maybe you want to end the workflow. Because if the task gets deleted, there is no action on the task, so that the workflow gets updated. So as and when the task gets deleted, you can update the workflow status, like rejected or completed, and giving some proper comments. So when the task gets completed, or it's not even completed, it's completes. So you just open the task form and then you clicked on complete task. That is when this event gets triggered. And after this event gets completed, then the field gets updated with the status, whatever you selected in the task form. So it's still not completed when this event triggers. So you can process the values before it actually updates the task content type fields. Okay. So like this, you have several events that you have control on when you go for a task process. Understood? I mean, the actions remain the same, and the actions appear based on what event that you selected. So for example, if I select this, some of this you can see, some of the list actions you could see here: update list item, wait for change, update for field change. And if you go to other events, some of the actions might not appear, and sometimes the fields. Based on the event, you will see the actions. Yeah, I think sometimes you wouldn't see this task behavior actions. We can end the task process. This is specific to the process. This appears only when you are into a task process. Otherwise, this wouldn't make sense. All right, any questions?
No.
Okay.
Probably, I think, what I'm thinking is maybe take some real-time examples and create one workflow from start till the end, and maybe also show exporting to Visio or creating Visio and doing it, because those are the things we might be doing a lot in the production. Um, a simple example, anything from start to end, that might really help everyone. That's my thought is.
Sure. So yeah, we can go ahead and use some events. So it's pretty similar actions that we will use it as we just did in this demo workflow, but certainly we in our next class we'll go ahead
Like
and configure some of the events at least in the task process to see the behavior in action. Okay.
like a HR process, like onboarding a user or something like that. Take a real-time situation and start till the end.
Sure. Yeah.
Manoj, all these tasks are sequential, right?
Yeah, these are all sequential. So designer allows you to configure sequential workflows. And of course you can have a parallel task running, a parallel process, which you can do it with using parallel block.
Okay, I cannot go back to previous one and
no, you cannot.
Oh, I cannot go back. Okay.
All right,
Do you have
so
any 2010
yeah.
administration textbooks, like a PDF that you can share with us?
Well, I do not read the textbooks at all, but I do read some online stuff. For administration, I can help you with that. I think I saw your mail.
Okay.
Yeah, I can help you with the best practices, and I'll try to find out some books for you on administration. Okay.
Okay, that's one thing. And we're planning to have a class the rest of the week. For me, I can attend a class tomorrow as well as on Friday, but Thursday we have a deployment, and I cannot.
Sorry.
I think as per the original plan, we were supposed